So I just wanted to comment on what happened in Montreal yesterday. What happened, the fact that there were violence on the streets of my hometown was completely unacceptable. What we saw was not peaceful protests. What we saw was actually violence, hate, and anti-Semitism, and this has no place on our streets. Of course, we believe in the freedom of speech. We believe in the freedom to demonstrate, but where we draw the line is when there's violence. And so that's why we wanted to make sure that we had clear comments about what happened. I'll just say it in French and then I'll pass the mic.
And if I may, first of all, we completely agree. This was nothing like lawful, peaceful protest. This was anarchy. It was an engagement in violence and hatred on display in the city of Montreal. And in particular, I wanted to particularly condemn the anti-Semitic behaviors that we witnessed. That has absolutely no place in Canada. I believe that lawful, peaceful protests can be co-opted by anarchists who have other agendas. Those agendas were quite apparent by the activities of that mob yesterday, and those behaviors are unacceptable, and we can condemn them, and in particularly the hatred and anti-Semitism that was on display in the strongest possible terms.
Thank you. We're ready to take questions.
Your approach to China, to the Arctic.
Yeah.
Creating councils that would take into account on modern issues.
Okay, so I'll let Minister of Defense talk about his own defense policy update, which was really focusing on the Arctic. But what I can tell you is we're working on a new Arctic foreign policy, which is about making sure that ultimately we protect our interests and we work with our allies in the Arctic. And we've worked on this new Arctic foreign policy along with Inuit and people from the north. So this is something that is really, really important. Why are we coming up with a new Arctic foreign policy? Two reasons. First, because of climate change and melting Arctic sea ice, what we're seeing now is that the Arctic is becoming way more accessible throughout the year. So our geography no longer only protects us. And the other thing, of course, is we're seeing greater Russia-China cooperation in the Arctic, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is allowing China to be even more in the Arctic, which is in itself a problem. And so based on that, we want to continue to support the Arctic Council, which is fundamental, and where Indigenous people from all 8 Arctic countries can talk to each other. But meanwhile, we also want to make sure that the Arctic 7, which are the Nordic 5 countries, Scandinavian countries, US and Canada, work together on security issues. We now know that all Nordic countries are part of NATO because Sweden and Finland have ratified, have acceded to NATO, and Canada was the first to ratify their accession.
Last question? No, really?
Or not. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, only that our work in the Arctic is not only predicated on the actions of our potential adversaries, particularly China and Russia. It's also our obligation as a nation to invest in our own sovereignty and in our own country. And we've gone to the north. I've met with the northern premiers, and I've met with Indigenous leadership right across the north. And what they've told us, that sovereignty and security in our high Arctic isn't just a plane going by or a ship sailing by when the ice is out. It's an investment in infrastructure. And so we are working very closely with the northern premiers, northern communities, and Indigenous leadership in order to make the necessary investments to build our nation and to build our own sovereignty in the Arctic and to reinforce it with investments in highways, in airport runways, in fiber optic communications, investments in other forms of infrastructure like heat generation, water treatment plants, schools, and medical services. We think there's a real opportunity through investments in national defense to also support through multi-use infrastructure the northern communities and to really establish our sovereignty and presence in the Arctic through significant new investment.
Speaking of priorities and spending, it seems like one of the consensus at this conference is that Canada's not spending enough. Gary Kasparov was fairly aggressive with you, Minister, yesterday on that. Minister Blair, I know you're hearing about it. I just sat down with Senator Risch, a very powerful Republican from the United States, close friend of Donald Trump's. He says Donald Trump would laugh out loud at Canada's spending timeline to get to 2%. Coming out of this, do you think you need a more solid plan to get to 2% more quickly? And what are you telling the Prime Minister about that?
I have met with Senator Risch. I had a meeting with him earlier this morning and many of the people here. And it's one of the great values of the Halifax International Security Forum and the attendance here of the CODEL is it gives us great opportunity to have these conversations. And I am able to assure him of Canada's absolute commitment. We know that we have to do more on defense and we are going to spend more money. But I also asked for their help today, and I think there's a huge opportunity for the investments that Canada needs to make, not just in how much money we have to spend, but what the capabilities we have to invest in and acquire. That creates real opportunities for greater collaboration and partnership between Canada and the United States and all of our NATO allies. And so I've asked for their help because we know that we're going to have to spend very significantly in our national defense. Doing it right involves acquiring capabilities that will also be beneficial to the United States and to our allies. And so we need to work better together and more collaboratively together. It's a conversation I had with Senator Risch. I believe we are in complete agreement. There's a real opportunity in the investments that Canada has to make and in the alliances that we have depended on for decades and even centuries to keep us safe. There's an opportunity for us to do better together. That's the conversation we were able to have at this forum.
Thank you, everyone.
And apparently I've got...
Yeah, I was hoping to ask you about...
Oh, can you do it in the microphone for Paul, please?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can speak a little bit about actually implementing some of these strategies. The Indo-Pacific strategy was unveiled last year. Have you actually been able to put some of those premises into practice? And can you kind of break down how?
Okay. So, see, your question is really relevant, and I'll just go a bit broadly to put it in context, okay? You've heard me here at the Halifax Security Forum talking about our security architecture. So to the east, NATO, to the north, the Arctic, and to the west, the Indo-Pacific. And what we've seen in all of, so we have a security architecture to the east, which is NATO. We have one in the north, which is NORAD, but we need to build one on the western part because there is no NATO in the Indo-Pacific, and we need to make sure ultimately that we work with our allies while, of course, working with ASEAN countries which want us to respect ASEAN centrality. That's the core of our Indo-Pacific strategy, which you're asking me about. And what we're seeing is 2 years into implementing the Indo-Pacific strategy, our goal is being achieved. And our goal was to become a reliable partner because we were not necessarily seen as a reliable partner beforehand. So the implementation of that was, at different levels. It included 17 different departments. It included $2.3 billion of budget. So we've been able to diversify trade, for example. We just signed a new free trade agreement with Indonesia. We've had many trade missions in Korea, in Japan, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, etc. So that's for trade. We've been able also to increase our presence in terms of diplomatically speaking. We're now a strategic partner of ASEAN. That was not the case 2 years ago. The Prime Minister, myself, we've been at every strategic dialogue with ASEAN countries. We've been able to sign agreements with Japan and also with Korea like never before on energy, on security and intelligence. So we're really working on that. We've been able to have, we're the country outside, within the West, after the US and Japan, that has the most frigates in the Indo-Pacific. We've done many Taiwan passages, Taiwan Strait passages with the Americans. We're the country that have done the most. So I'm just giving you many examples, Justin, but just to show you how much we've invested, and we did a very important pivot by really concentrating ourselves on the Indo-Pacific. Okay, thank you.